Are we really calling it vibe coding now? Do we have to? Because I'm not such a fan of that term, vibe coding. I just find it silly and kind of weird. And it doesn't really speak to what to me is like so exciting about actually coding with AI. I'd rather just call it building with AI or coding with AI. And I'm finding that these days, I'm still obviously writing a lot of code, but I think I might even be prompting and communicating with my AI assistant or agent even more than writing actual code. I'm not vibe coding. I'm building with AI using Cursor. All right, so let's take a look. I'm going to sort of just kind of walk through my Cursor setup here in the product that I happen to be currently working on, and that is, building out the components product at instrumental.dev. It's a components library product for Ruby on Rails. I'm in the thick of it. It's a really complex product from a programming standpoint, and Cursor and AI has been a really fantastic assistant for me in getting this thing built. All right, so I'm going to start with a couple of quick tips, things that I find myself, using quite often. This isn't going to be the most in-depth Cursor manual or tutorial. You can find that kind of stuff elsewhere. I'm just going to walk through what I am doing in my workflow and how I have it set up. So let's start with Cursor rules. You may have heard about this. It's a really good feature, but it's actually one of these things, and there's going to be a lot of these things where it's a really cool feature that I am not using, or at least not using enough. I'm going to go into settings, go to Cursor settings, and then under rules, you'll find this thing called user rules. Actually, right now, I only have a single line in here. I'm sure this is a big opportunity for me to add to my rules, or I know that there are a lot of forums and things online where people share their Cursor rules. Those are probably worth digging into, but I'll be completely honest. Cursor has gotten so good, and the models and the AI and the different modes have gotten so good that I haven't felt the need to modify my rules. Although I do have one in my project, which I'll show you in a second. But the only rule that I added here a few weeks ago was just to tell it, hey, never try to remove my own comments in my code, because I happen to be the type of person who actually likes to write a lot of code comments. Especially in products like this one that are really, really complex with a lot of logic, that go in all sorts of different directions. I like to have these comments everywhere. I find that they actually help me dive right back into the code and maintain and remember what my thinking and my strategy and the systems design was around each thing. I think that adding these comments also helps train the AI on understanding what each section of code is doing, although the AI is probably even better at doing that than I am. But I just find it's like a quality of life kind of thing where I always want these comments to be present. But I did notice that the AI was always removing them. Like when it would give me a suggested piece of code and some updates to make, it would just wipe out these comments that I wanted them there for a reason. So that's why I did. How do I get back to my Cursor rules? I don't know if Cursor rules is available in this menu. You know how Cursor came from VS Code. It's like a fork of VS Code. They have their own settings and their rules here. So I'm not quite sure how to navigate to it other than getting to it from the menu. As you can see, I don't come in here very often. But one of the newer updates in Cursor is now you can add a folder in your actual project. So up here, if you have a folder called .cursor, and then inside that, a folder called rules, you can create these .mdc files. I'm actually not even sure what MDC stands for. I probably should do more research before I do these videos. But again, this is sort of just more of like a day in the life and what my projects look like. Now, in this project, this particular project, which is a Rails components project, I'm building a gem for Rails. It's not an actual Rails application. This is a gem that you would install into an application. And so that's why I created this about file where I'm saying this is a Ruby on Rails gem, which users will install in their gem file. In their host Ruby on Rails application provides a collection of generators that can help you install components into your Rails project. So I wanted to make that really clear to the AI, because without this, it's going to treat all this Ruby and Rails-ish code as if it's its own Rails application, which is not correct, right? This is some pretty important context for the AI to have. And I did find that once I added this a few weeks ago, every interaction that I had with the AI was much more accurate in terms of what I want to actually build into my project. So, you can add multiple custom rules that are specific to your current project in this cursor folder. Now let's go into some of these like newer features that just started rolling out in the last few months. I put my AI chat panel on the left side, and I like to have my files on the right side, and I can, open and close it with, I mapped Command L to that. Cursor has been updating this little interface quite a bit. So now I think it defaults to agent mode. And I'll be honest, I never leave agent mode. I never use ask and I never use manual. My sense is that agent mode is sort of a combination of all these things. Like ask is really for if you just want to like ask it questions about your code base, but you don't actually want to make any changes. I guess it's sort of good for situations where you want to like plan out a feature, or maybe you're diving into a code base that you're new to and you need to understand how it all works. I guess you could use ask for that, but you could also just ask questions when you're in agent mode too. So I don't really see the point of switching. Manual mode, I think, is a little bit targeted, but as I'll talk about here in a second, like I actually work in a very targeted way when I'm in agent mode. So I stick to that. Over here, you can select exactly which model you're using. So like in earlier months, I think in my previous video that I did about Cursor, I was primarily using GPT-4o because I think at the time that's what it was defaulting to. Since then, Claude from Anthropic came out with Claude 3.7 and 3.7 Sonnet. There's 3.5 Sonnet. There's this Max thing. Honestly, I haven't really spent enough time like reading up on what the difference is between these, but I have found that Claude seems to be more accurate and more useful in my coding work, especially in Ruby on Rails projects. So that I think is what it's using most of the time, but now it just auto selects and I keep that option turned on. Most of the time, I don't even really know which LLM model is actually being used. I actually find that this auto option is really good. All I know is that more times than not, it's more and more accurate in its responses to me. It's incredible to me how much better Cursor and these AI models in general have gotten, like just in the last like 3 months. 4 months ago, it was probably like 50% of the time it was giving me good information. 50% of the time I would just reject it and say like, that's not what I want. I'm finding like 80% plus more most of the time. It's giving me code suggestions, changes that I actually do want to apply. And I'm finding that I need to fix it far less than when I did earlier. So I really like this auto select option. I keep that turned on and I keep it in agent mode. So that's what I'm doing. So if you haven't seen it already, you can use this feature up here to pull in specific files to bring into the context that the AI is going to read when it takes your prompt and it gives you a suggestion. So I think by default, it's going to pull in whatever file you are currently looking at. But if you know that you're going to ask it a question or prompt it, and you need it to reference, say, a handful of other specific files in your code base, you can do that. Now, of course, Cursor is designed to be sort of plugged into your entire code base, but there are so many files in your code base that it's not going to always use the smartest approach to find the right ones to reference. And I'm going to get to this in a minute. If my prompts are very targeted, I also want to be targeted in which files it's looking at. So you can click this button, or I like to use Option Command P, and I want to pull in, let's pull in pre-checks, and you won't really know what all these things mean. They're sort of specific to my project that I'm currently working on here. Let's do in the roadmap. And then I can give it a prompt. So right now I'm in the process of like really refactoring how components are installed into a host Rails application. Again, that's more in the weeds on my own project here, but it's something that's going to involve, this refactoring is going to involve multiple files. So you know what? And another thing, I'm actually doing this in my day-to-day is I'm finding that I'm typing a lot of prompts into Cursor, and my fingers are actually getting tired from like typing all these words. So I'm actually trying to use dictation a lot more. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I can do the control key twice. I do that. refactor my installation process so that if it's the primary component, then we will build the component's roadmap and then cycle through all of the components that are in the array of components to install, and run the installation process that way. I didn't really phrase that exactly how I wanted it, but I think that's good enough, at least just for this example. So I'm going to send that, and we're going to wait a minute for it to kind of process and look at these relevant files that I gave it to look at. One other thing that I noticed lately with the more recent updates to Cursor and bringing in these other models like Claude 3.7, it actually takes a little bit longer than it used to analyze and search and generate its suggestion, especially when the prompt that I asked it is sort of complex, and I know that there are going to be like multiple changes that are going to be happening here. The other thing is that I'm recording this at 10:30 a.m. Eastern time on a Wednesday, and I am definitely finding that it's a little bit slower as we get near the middle of the business workday, at least here in the US, which tells me there are definitely some like high traffic periods in Cursor's servers and infrastructure that tend to kind of slow it down. But here we go. We've got some refactoring here. So my workflow here would be to kind of go through and read most of this. I'll be honest, a lot of times I sort of just skim it. But I do sort of read to see what exactly were the changes. The other thing I really like, and I think this is fairly new, in my file, Cursor is going to not only show me these changes, obviously in green, and if it got rid of anything, it'll be in red. But I like this on the right edge. There's this like green highlight. So when I have like a really long file, it can sometimes be hard to find the exact spot in the file where these changes are. So I can always find them that way. The other thing that they've really improved is this interface down here. So I can sort of cycle through the different changes. And I was hoping that in this case, it would have made changes to multiple files, but it actually didn't. In that case, it has this thing where I can click review next file. And sometimes like the changes that it'll make will involve like 4, 5, 6 different files. And I can just go through one by one and click next file or review next, I think it says. Maybe I'll try to come up with an example of that. Cursor and the interface has come a long way just in the last couple of months to make all this a lot clearer. So, I can accept, which I usually do with command, well, I guess it's command Y, but I believe command return, yeah, it sort of accepts everything. Command Y will accept like the specific line that you are currently looking at. And, normally I do go through and I sort of read it line by line to see exactly what was changed and why. And then maybe I can spot things that I still want to tweak. But, another tip here is, in addition to pulling in specific files that I wanted to reference, there are a lot of times when I want it to just focus on a very specific section of code. And so I do this a lot where I will highlight just a couple of lines of code or a specific method that I want it to edit, and I'll click add to chat, or I could just do command L. And you'll see here that it added not only the file, but also these lines, 98 to 105. And then I might say like, is there a better way to refactor this method call? This one is sort of, it is what it is, but it's going to like analyze that specific call. So all I said was like, refactor this method call. And this means the thing that I actually highlighted. So it's going to focus on these lines of code right here. Now, here's something that I think Cursor probably will improve in the future, but it's still a little bit confusing if you're new to it. So here's what happened here. I asked it a question about a specific section of code. And the first part here, this is not actually the suggested change. All it's doing here is it's referencing. It's saying like the current code is this, right? It's sort of like just pointing to it. That's what this block is. But Cursor also has this button, I guess, which is always built into these little code blocks, like apply to this page or apply to this file. But there's nothing to actually apply here. This is just a reference point. So I feel like in the future, Cursor's interface should be smarter about that to know when the AI is just referencing a section of code versus when it's actually something more like this, where it is actually suggesting an edit. And the other thing, I think this is because I'm in agent mode. You'll see it already has the check mark or these buttons where I can accept the change. Meaning in this case, I don't have the button to click to apply to my code base because I think in agent mode, it's automatically going to apply it or it's automatically going to make the change. My only next step is to review it and then accept. In this case, I was actually happy with the previous one, so I will reject that. I think the other way to reject everything, I think, is Command Delete. Oh, it's Shift Command Delete. Yeah, so that will sort of like reject everything if I want to sort of like undo or go back. Okay, so now I've just got two more tips here, which are more high level, strategic, more about how I go about prompting. So the first one is that I really try to be as targeted as possible. So this is getting back to the idea of quote unquote vibe coding. I think the term vibe coding tends to refer to, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but it could be people who don't really know how to program and really haven't learned and really aren't full stack developers, but they're using AI to sort of lead the way and build out a product. And they don't necessarily know what all the code that it's spitting out is doing, which is fine. It's pretty cool. I happen to think it's a good thing to empower people to be able to build stuff when they weren't capable and have the knowledge on how to build stuff before. That's great, I think. But for full stack developers like myself, and I'm guessing like you, if you're watching this video, or maybe you're learning Ruby on Rails or you're learning how to code, which I still think is a valid and a really good thing to do in this career, we can use and we can leverage AI at a much higher, a much deeper level, right? And so that's why I'm finding that I'm actually prompting the AI a lot more these days than I am writing actual code. So when I'm prompting AI, most of the time I'm being highly targeted, right? I know exactly the system that I'm building, that I'm assembling here in my product. So I'm using the AI as my assistant to execute the changes that I want to make to my system. I know exactly how my system works. I know exactly what every method and every file and every line of code is doing because I'm being very intentional about how I'm crafting my product. But I don't necessarily have to be the one to write out every line of code. And that's where being highly targeted about it. So instead of saying like, build a whole feature, build a whole billing system for me, go. Yeah, you can do that and it'll start to spit out a bunch of code that you can pop into your project. But I find that you're going to be far less accurate that way. And it's going to have a lot of mistakes. It's going to have a lot of things that just don't make sense. It's going to build some things that maybe you didn't ask for because you were way too broad. I much prefer to say like, all right, in this method, we're just going to set up the initialization for the installation of this component. And I want to design it this way with this method has to execute these 3 tasks. And yeah, write this section of code for me. So I really like to be a much more targeted. And even though it's going to require more prompts and more highly targeted code edits, I'm finding those are going to be much more accurate and much more useful and productive in what I actually want to build, which ultimately in the long run is going to save me a lot of time rather than asking it to just, here's one prompt to build an entire feature. And now I need to dig through and find all the mistakes and find all the things that I want to undo and change. That's a messy way to do it. I much rather prefer this highly targeted approach. That to me is the difference between vibe coding and actually building or coding with AI. Another tip, and I just started doing this recently, I'm finding it very helpful, is especially when I'm debugging or troubleshooting a really tricky issue. Obviously, when you're in a project, if you come across like an error, if the whole thing fails, you could obviously just highlight that error and pop it into the chat, and the AI will immediately read the error and try to find the solution. But other times, there are things that happen that don't necessarily error out, but they are unexpected results or the thing didn't work according to your design. And so in those cases, what I used to do was I would spend a lot of time prompting and describing, like, I was expecting this outcome, but instead I got that outcome. And I think it's something like this. And I think the problem might be here. Tell me how to fix that problem, right? I might phrase the prompt in that way. But I'm finding that a better approach is so like, for example, here is a Rails project where I'm testing out my components gem, and the components gem generates a lot of this output in the console. So here is like a big installation process, and some things were successful and some things were failed, and there were things that happened out of order, and there were probably a bunch of different problems that I am aware have happened. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight all of this, and I'm going to bring it back into my project where I'm working on this gem. And I'm going to say, you know what? I'm going to dictate it. That'll be easier. I'm going to paste the output from the terminal when I ran the authentication generator. And I want you to find and list the issues that you're seeing. And then I will decide which one or ones we want to fix. And then I'm going to paste all of that output from the console right below. I'm going to send. And so what this is going to do is, it's going to analyze the output, and then it's going to literally give me like a numbered list of the issues that it's seeing. And again, like, I know what the most important problems are, but what I'm doing here is I'm making sure that the AI can identify those same problems. And sure enough, the one that I know that I'm actually fixing today is this first one: duplicate content component installations. Long story. It's a really tricky thing that I need to fix, but I'm glad that was the first issue that it also identified. So it's sort of a way to confirm that my AI assistant and myself are on the same page. We're both seeing the same thing, and now I can proceed to. And I mean, it identified a couple of other issues too that I'll probably get around to fixing, but this first one is the most important. And so now that it identified that, now I can say, like, yes, suggest the best approach to fixing the duplicate component installation problem. Okay, so now that it has identified the right problem to solve, so it has that context, now I can go ahead and prompt it to suggest a fix for that. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Yes, the first issue, duplicate component installations. Please give me your best suggestion on an approach to fix that. Okay, so that was sort of a long one, and it did go ahead and give me some suggestions. Again, this is one of those things where it's sort of like pointing to some code, but then here it gave me some code edits, and it made those code edits actually in a couple of different files. I could see down here, this is a new part of the interface where it says that it edited 2 files. I don't really use that much, but as I said earlier, I can find these suggestions that it has already made by looking at the right edge here. This is what I tend to look at most, is I can find those things right here. Here's a big chunk of code that it added, and then it added a couple bits down here, and I can accept this file. And then I love this new feature where I can just click review next file. So that's going to hop over to my other file where it removed a bit of code here and it added a bit of code here. And then I can just accept all, command return, and I'm good to go. So that's the update on what my current workflow is looking like as I use Cursor. As I said, it keeps changing every couple of months because, Cursor keeps rolling out these updates, which is fantastic. But, as you saw in this video, I'm working heavily in Ruby on Rails, and I happen to be building a gem for Rails in instrumental components. And, I did another entire video specifically about building with AI for Ruby on Rails. It's called Ruby on Rails on AI. And it's why I happen to think that the Ruby coding language, programming language, is perfectly optimal for this new era of coding with AI. I think it's an interesting take. I firmly believe it. I invite you to check it out and let me know what you think. So thanks for watching. See ya.